Okay, I'll go ahead and start. My name is Jerry McHugh. I'm president and owner of San Juan Resources, and uh, been putting these webinars, presentations on the San Juan Basin for interested parties and colleagues and fellow operators in the San Juan Basin and friends. So we operate 40 wells in the San Juan Basin and have Mancos oil and natural gas projects. Been involved in the San Juan Basin for 40 years. Last month's presentation was on 40-year history, my perspective of the San Juan Basin and what I've seen and where we are now and where we are today. So after talking with Dr. Dan Fine and Jason Sandel, we came up with looking ahead, or is there greener grass ahead for our blue chip basin here in New Mexico? Second largest natural gas field in North America. Our first guest is Dan Fine, PhD, research associate at MIT. He just told me he did his dissertation on economic theory and systems. He's been in New Mexico for 15 years, lives up in Placitas, just north of Albuquerque. From 2013 to 16, Dan was the project leader for the new energy policy for the state of New Mexico. One thing I really have enjoyed about my friendship with Dan is Dan calls it like he sees it, whereas we're trying to make sure our blue chip basin gets on the map and we get some great attention and we market ourselves well. Part of what these presentations are for to help is to help increase that opportunity. So Dan is going to tell it like it is, and the floor is yours now, Dan. So welcome.
Thank you, Jerry. I want to just point out that.
And speak up, okay, please.
Can you hear me now?
And let me also do a little housekeeping. I'm just going to mute everybody here before we start, except for Dan and me. So, okay, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
Well, I wanted to point out that Jerry has carried a tradition of the history of the basin, the San Juan Basin, to technological achievement now with this series. It began with Tom Dugan's book on gas, and now he has carried on that tradition with this series. Looking forward to more of it, and what I can do essentially is get the Permian operators to look in it as well. But thank you, Jerry, for this feature and endeavor. I will begin here. Shall I begin?
Yes, please start.
Okay. First thing about the basin is this. Recently, I've done a quick review of a potential in the pandemic which affected the Permian Basin and oil. And this was with producers and others. What has happened, of course, is the pandemic beginning in February and continuing. It reduced the output of natural gas, associated gas, that's gas and oil, which is a chief characteristic of the Permian Basin, whereas the San Juan Basin is a dry gas basin. The Permian is not. Very gassy. So what has happened, and I was interviewed on this, and I'm continuing it, is that the drop of output in oil, of course, decreased the output in associated gas. The earlier 2-year period in which the Permian Basin had associated gas, stranded gas almost, no breakaway, no takeaway capacity, This was ending with pipeline capacity on stream in 19 and 2021 to take about 15 billion BCF out of the Permian to the Gulf of Mexico. Then the pandemic hit. What has happened is that the Permian oil, meaning the gas, the associated gas, at least the oil barrels and so on, will be down and is down about 25%. And recovery depends on price. I'll get into that in a moment. So to begin on the San Juan Basin, 25% plus or minus means less associated gas coming out of the Permian. That gas not being in the market presented and presents an opportunity for San Juan gas. So that I did a few forecasts for the price of that gas. I point out, and the Santa Fe New Mexican failed to report this, that in the pandemic, just 45 days ago, what happened there was a strange characteristic. The price of oil in the May contract collapsed. The futures contract got to negative, and the futures required delivery, physical delivery, and storage was full. Couldn't find storage. The media reported this as the price of oil was zero minus zero. It was not. That was only a futures contract expiring in May. So what was the real price, the low? Roughly around 10 to 18 on that same day per barrel. Well, what happened also to natural gas? In 19, natural gas from the Permian, that is the associated gas, stranded without mainly markets for it, pipeline transit absent and so on. That was negative, quite negative in terms of the producers taking their gas and paying consumers, buyers, to take the gas at $4.71 per 1,000 metric. Well, from that low in 19, and with the pandemic and the associated gas, the price for Permian gas is now equal to the price of San Juan gas. They are absolutely one by one. In other words, 183 per 1,000 cubic feet. So that's a recovery from minus whatever in 19 for the gas in Permian, now up to the same price as San Juan, tied. What does that mean? It means a pull on gas, meaning more value for the gas because less production of the oil, which creates the associated gas. From that point on, I concluded the opportunity for San Juan natural gas will now benefit by way of less associated gas in the Permian. The two basins are out of line historically. 65 to 70% of the natural gas output in New Mexico is San Juan. Now it's reversed. What I see is a uptick now on the price of San Juan gas. And I forecasted that as for $3.25 next year. And I'll hold that with weather and with essentially the stockpile or the inventory down. So there is a benefit in the pandemic and the slowdown in demand in San Juan. And how long does this take place? On the downside, already operators in the Bone Spring and Wolfcamp positions where there's very good rock are looking at the part of their position, part of the geology and their wells, which produce more gas to meet higher prices. So that's a downside. That could happen as they make decisions to complete wells. So I wanted first to say this about New Mexico. Jason Sandel will probably follow up with a condition of oil and gas and the governor and the special session. I hope he clarifies all the issues now. I would also say now that going back, you cannot, it's impossible for operators, investors, and others in New Mexico to establish a position on the price of oil unless there is a geophysical, geopolitical, and geoeconomic comprehension of OPEC. OPEC stands, it has survived, it is enlarged, it is Russia and Saudi Arabia and other 17 members from the Middle East. It controls the world market and it controls the world price of oil, which WTI New Mexico follows. In other words, there is a bit of enthusiasm in looking at prices as if producers here and the state authority has anything to do with the world price of oil. Having said that, where do I think we're going? I'm coming in with a negative position that the extension of the agreement that OPEC made to take out and go for 9.7 million barrels a day was an extension to August 1. After that, it is very difficult for me to even think that OPEC Russia will sustain that. In other words, after August, the extension of supply restraint by OPEC, which lifts the world price, less production, less basic economics, less supply, that will end. And we'll be in a period now where the 9.7 million barrels dissipates as OPEC Russia again starts producing and moves away from constraint on production. We had this, and everyone seems to forget, we had this for 11 days in the middle of the pandemic. A price war erupted between Russia and Saudi Arabia, meaning Saudi Aramco. And it was ended when Saudi Arabia it started with a conflict with Russia, and Russia took the position that the pandemic would go away. It was superficial. It followed China. China's initial position was world trade should not be disrupted by it. The Saudis then decided that Russia was wrong. They needed a pandemic response, so they led the way with 1 million barrels on their own. And then Russia came in, and the price war was over. It was an 11-day event in the middle of the pandemic. So I'm looking ahead at the end of supply constraint and the revival of some of that oil coming back on the market, led by Russia, and coming through at the end of the summer. Now, I go back to this position. If this happens, then we have a lower oil price. Where do I think it will be? I'm taking that risk in consideration of my projection that we're going to live with 2 years to 2022 of an oil price of $32 a barrel average, with a price in the futures market giving the price, the traders, essentially a trading range of between $32 and $40 a barrel. So my forecast is we're living in New Mexico on the oil side with probably late in 2021, $40 of oil, $32 now throughout 2020. Now I say that because I know there is a great deal of a sense even today of enthusiasm looking at the WTI price. My caution is that the WTI price and others, producers, can begin to do what they should not do. And I'm taking a position, only an academic position, because I'm not an operator of it at all. But if there's a price signal in WTI, the Permian producers may jump the gun. And I think two have. They've been identified, putting back some oil. If that takes place, jumping of the gun, that is a powerful price signal to OPEC. OPEC's major position on the shale in the Southwest is to essentially control it or eliminate it. This is the main competition in world oil to OPEC and Russia. And this is what started the 2014 collapse of oil, when basically OPEC said, we will outproduce them, we will cause their non-economic producers to go bankrupt. And that lasted 2 years. So I caution this, and I'm speaking now academically. Producers who jump the gun and see a price signal, even now, 37, 38, 40, 42, that price signal is taken in Riyadh and in Moscow as a threat again that US shale producers will take advantage of the price and then essentially confront the OPEC position and Russia on market share. So we're shaping up to who jumps the gun in the Permian here and the Bakken. And what does that price signal mean to market share, conflict, and war, or price war? The third position I'd like to take a little bit here is LNG for the basin for San Juan. I did a policy statement for Heritage Foundation on Mexican imports of oil. We were able to say that the initial position of Mexico and the president of Mexico, AMLO, as he's known, informally, AMLO, was negative. The initial position was to decrease the imports from New Mexico and basically the Southwest of natural gas, and to do it themselves. Nationalism, the revival of Pemex, the national state company, was in the cards. We wrote the study and we urged Mexico to consider that the cheap price of American natural imports was sufficient to offset a costly $7 to $15 billion investment to try to get gas, natural gas in Mexico with Pemex for all many reasons. And the Mexican ambassador to the United States invited us to lunch. They began to talk, and that did not happen. So where is Mexico now? Mexico is not going to be a market, an expansion market for more natural gas. 5 BCF a day is what they're taking now, and they'll be back up possibly to 7. And that's about it. And by 2025, they expect, with foreign investment, maybe they will have a change in their development of natural gas, and they'll be using modern technology, meaning the fracking of Mexico. So there's limitations in Mexico, plus delivery, plus pipelines, plus private versus government, and so on. The LNG option then is what? LNG has down 6%, and before the pandemic in December, the LNG from the Gulf was 9 BCF. It's now 3.5 BCF from the Gulf. Was that pandemic? Yes. Was there something similar in terms of geopolitical issues? The most surprising thing is the announcement that a French LNG carrier is delivering LNG from France to Mexico this month, and so on. So markets are variable and price sensitive, but the LNG outlay for gas, or the outcrop of advantage for the San Juan Basin, is limited. I'd also point out on LNG, it's important to remember what has happened in the last year and now going forward. LNG from Russia, from the Great Siberia pipeline, is gas. LNG also now is providing a new market for Russia through Gazprom. China's position as a buyer of LNG from the West Coast is much diminished and probably postponed for the next 6-7 years, or when Putin leaves Russia, if that's possible. So the alignment on LNG between Russia and China on oil is firm, and it's not essentially a risk for a commodities trader to play with. It is a institutional historical change now, and the opportunity for LNG spot trades may exist in China, but it's long-term contracts with China on LNG absolutely diminished, almost absent for the next 6 to 12 years. So is that a solution? Is essentially San Juan gas going to benefit by LNG? I would say no. I say the LNG potential is there, much diminished, and the output from the West Coast in building LNG liquefaction is almost zero at this point. I would say also that, recall the El Paso line of natural gas going north and taking San Juan gas, natural gas, goes through Arizona, and part of it goes to Mexico through Tucson. So that gas goes out to the west as it is now. Having covered those 3 points, am I out of time, Jerry?
Yeah, I know Jason's got a hard stop at 9:55. Why don't, I've muted everybody, but why don't you go ahead and put any questions you had in the chat box? I did put the Santa Fean article from June 6th in which you were quoted in the Santa Fe paper, which people can look at that link there in the chat box. And so anybody put any questions in there. What does this mean? One question I have, and then we'll go to Jason. What does this mean for San Juan Natural Gas? If oil is going to be, if they're going to jump the gun, that's going to lower the price of oil, and they're going to have to stop producing. So it's going to be some seesaws back and forth. How does that bode for San Juan Natural Gas? This winter, medium term, longer term. Any thoughts on that, Dan?
Well, I would say I'm bullish short term, with that one proviso that the producers, Concho and others who have good rock and they have deep structure and much more gas, if they see a price move, they could move their completions in that direction. Without that happening, if they hold the line on that, I see we've got $1 more. Maybe we're going to be in the $3 range next year, and that I can't. Essentially, I'm at meteorological MIT, where I get my information. They concur in terms of a colder winter, which helps gas as well. So I see that as a short-term move. I can't go beyond the short-term. Middle term would be 5 years.
Okay, great. Put your questions in there for Dan in the chat box if anybody has any. While I want to introduce now Jason Sandel, the third generation New Mexican executive president of the Aztec Well family of companies. I also would say, Dan, you talk about initiatives in the San Juan. Jason's father, and I know my dad, Jerome McHugh Sr., and Tom Dugan and Bob Bayless and Greg Marion and Al Greer had a consortium of natural gas producers about the time that gas was deregulated, called the Four Corner Gas Producers Association. And it was very loosely fit, and I know that people in Washington thought it was they had a big marble building in Farmington or something like that. But that was a lot of work that was done back in those days to try to promote deregulation of 10 and 25-cent gas, right, Jason? Let me unmute you here, and I will turn it over to Jason Sandel.
Jerry, thank you very much. That's exactly correct. I mean, our family has a long history of promoting nat gas coming out of the San Juan Basin, as prolific as this basin is for the lower 48 and now potentially beyond. If we're going to try to share my screen, I've got a presentation, but before I do that, just everybody wave. Can everybody hear me okay? And cool. All right, good deal. Appreciate that. Just a little bit of friendliness here on a Tuesday morning, doing a Zoom call with Jerry McHugh. Appreciate this, Jerry, the opportunity. So let's share and go to this PowerPoint and start it up. Good. Can everybody see? Perfect. Okay. Well, what I want to talk about is the San Juan Basin being a castaway, not a cast out. And those that remember the movie Castaway might have an appreciation for what I'm getting ready to talk about, because it's a terrific story about overcoming challenges, and that's how I'm looking at the San Juan Basin right now. But before we begin, one of the things that I'd like to do is just recognize that that the COVID-19 pandemic is upon us. That there are a great number of impacts to our economy, obviously, and to people's lives. And so far, in the state of Colorado, there's been 1,373 people who have lost their lives. New Mexico, 440, and Texas, 1,983. And no matter what your position is on masks or no masks, or whatever your political affiliation is, these are still lives that have been lost. And I think that it's important for us to take a moment and remember those lives that have been lost since we've been overcome by this pandemic. So thank you for that opportunity. Moving on then, just a little bit about myself. I'm a native of Farmington, UNM grad. I was a senior staffer for the New Mexico State Senate from 96 to 2001. I was a city councilor and chair of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. I was a member of the Michelle Lujan Grisham Environment Department Transition Team, Methane Advisory Panel, and I am currently a convener of the New Mexico Energy Transition Committee, which is the committee that is seeking to transition from coal-fired power plant here in the Four Corners to some sort of alternative energy that is based upon the Energy Transition Act that was passed by the legislature in 2019. I'm a former member of the Economic Development Commission and current member of the COVID Economic Recovery Council on behalf of the state of New Mexico. And also just recently been, I don't know, elected is the right word, but I am now the chairman of the Western States and Tribal Nations Natural Gas Initiative, which is a really exciting initiative that we'll talk about here in just a little bit. My job is that I'm the executive vice president of the Aztec Well family of companies. We're a drilling and well servicing contractor primarily based in the San Juan Basin, but we also have rigs in the Permian Basin. At one point, we were operating in the Hugoton, the Marcellus, in the Uinta, the San Juan, Permian, and we have definitely felt the impact of the collapse of nat gas prices back dating to 2008, when nat gas collapsed from 15 to 2. So, as a drilling contractor, these are real impacts in my life. Looking at the industry outlook, this is the cast out part. Rigs are coming into town and being shut down. Unemployment is headed up, and the impact is scary. I think Dr. Fine covered that quite well. The prediction for rigs in the San Juan Basin right now, for the foreseeable future, are 0 drilling rigs. The Permian capital spend is looking to drop from 29 billion to 12 billion. Permits are down. There will be an oil production decline, which Dr. Fine covered very well. The recurring revenue budget in the state of New Mexico is looking to be about, well, $2.2 billion below what was expected when the budget was passed. And as an industry, we are confronted with economic development professionals using the word diversification as a buzzword that identifies that really what they want to do is go away from oil and gas development because they see it as very volatile. And so it's critical for us as an industry and as a state to look at how we can promote responsible and safe and viable fossil fuel production. And that's some of what I'd like to talk about here today. And we also, as part of that, need to provide a safe haven for ESG investors looking for financial institutions that are trustworthy and defensible. That's a reality in the investment world today. And as an industry, we need to make sure that we are providing to what those demands are. And all of that is because the San Juan Basin and really the state of New Mexico and our oil and gas business is too important. It's too important for the state. It's too important for the United States. Just looking at New Mexico, there's 1,134 oil and gas businesses in the state, directly employing over 26,000 people. There are 4,000 who have filed for unemployment in the past 3 months as a result of the pandemic and the collapse in commodity prices. There's expected to be another 1,500 to 2,500 jobs that could falter, with over $500 million in lost wages across the state, with an impact of a decline of $20 million in personal income tax collections. And these businesses, these 1,134 businesses plus the operating companies, have had a $6 billion taxable gross receipts impact into the state. So our industry is just simply too important. And the fact of the matter is that that is recognized by a great number of leaders, from the federal government down to the state to regulatory agencies. Our recovery actions have been focused on keeping the energy sector moving and producing to the extent possible, by being considered essential employees according to the Department of Homeland Security, which was adopted by the state of New Mexico and tribal governments. There are effective COVID-safe practices that are in place to ensure that we can operate in a safe manner. There's been an extension of idle well time limits to prevent unnecessary production, and there's also been regulatory relief as requested by the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association and IPA&M. There's a push to secure federal money to plug orphan wells, to get rig companies like mine to go take care of a large number of wells that remain across the United States that need to be plugged. And the state continues with a safe opening based upon a favorable health data, with phase 2 expected in the near future. All of that is around a very clear understanding from the state of New Mexico's perspective that state-to-state competition for oil and gas capital spend is fierce. And that's not only for oil and gas, but for every industry doing business in the state of New Mexico. But with the impact that oil and gas has on our state budget and our employment numbers, there is dedication to ensuring that we can operate into the future. Which then brings me to work that I'm doing with the Western States and Tribal Nations Natural Gas Initiative. New Mexico just recently joined this coalition. As Jerry talked about earlier, back in the day, my father and Mr. Dugan and other leaders, Mr. Greer, came together to promote San Juan natural gas in a market where we were looking at 10 to 15 cents per unit. And this movement for the natural gas exports through advocacy by the Western States and Tribal Nations organization, it is simply an extension of that, just understanding that we're in a new market and a new world. This organization is dedicated to promoting the consumption and the export of Rocky Mountain natural gas as promoting the right jobs and the right supply and right for the environment. Rocky Mountain natural gas has been ignored, and we are seeking to promote natural gas exports and accelerating fuel switching and decarbonization both locally and globally. We are also focused on building a comprehensive Rocky Mountain export infrastructure, looking where there are choke points in our pipeline infrastructure to prevent us from being able to export, and also looking at promoting LNG export facilities. And we are looking to partner with other organizations for a sustainable future, talking about that ESG investment piece. So very specifically, we're speaking from a New Mexico perspective, from a San Juan gas perspective, having active conversations with Costa Azul. Costa Azul is in phase 1, where they'll be looking for half of a BCF per day. And at the end of the day, when we began conversations with Costa Azul, which is a Sempra facility, where they're going to be reversing from LNG import to LNG export, they really didn't even know that Rocky Mountain natural gas existed. That sounds funny to say, but they were very focused on the associated gas from the Permian and looking at how they could transport that gas to their facility. And now with the supply destruction that's coming out of the Permian based upon the low oil commodity price, they are looking for something more long-term and dependable. And I will say that Rocky's gas has got their attention, which is an exciting development for us that's being promoted by the Western States and Tribal Nations. So just looking at the amount of gas that the Rocky Mountains have, we're looking at 565 TCF, and looking specifically at the San Juan Basin, the cumulative natural gas production through late 2009 was totaled at 42.6 TCF. Most estimates are saying that there is at least double, if not triple, that available. That is primarily derived from 4 different formations, which is a sustainable and dependable source of fuel for LNG exports that are anticipated over the next 30 to 40 years. Of course, the Piceance-Uinta Basin also has substantial gas resources, as does the greater Green River Basin. So going from a cast out to a cast away, like in the movie Cast Away begins with lots of doom, but then you've got Tom Hanks persevering, and then he goes through a process of awakening, and then finds a new day. And our new day is about a worldwide fuel switch. According to Shell, Asia will absorb more than 70% of the annual growth in LNG demand through 2040. And we know that renewable energy needs natural gas. 80% of the global energy demand by 2040 will be met by renewables, which will be 37% of it, and natural gas, which will be 43%. As I said, there's exciting developments with Costa Azul. Sempra has now announced a 20-year sales and purchase agreement for phase 1, with a final investment decision that's going to be coming within the 3rd quarter of 2020. So very, very quickly. Again, this is half a B of demand per day that they're looking to fulfill quickly. Jordan Cove, there is some movement on Jordan Cove while it is difficult, but the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has decided to certify the construction of the LNG facility and the Pacific Connector pipeline project. And Western States and Tribal Nations is actively involved in supporting the Jordan Cove project as well. And finally, we're having active conversations about synergies between natural gas, particularly pipeline infrastructure, and hydrogen for future opportunities, looking at ESG investments in the industry. And our castaway is about, because tomorrow the sun will rise, and who knows what the tide could bring. And that's what Chuck Nolan said in Castaway. And because I had the fortunate opportunity to be home and watch that movie with my son here very, very recently, it moved me in thinking about the San Juan Basin, about we really don't know what the tide could bring, but I know that the Rocky Mountain producers of natural gas are strongly supportive of doing everything that we can to promote the export of nat gas, both dry gas to Mexico and for export to Asia, which we think that there's a strong market between now and 2040. So with that, Jerry, I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and certainly willing to answer any questions. And just really appreciate everybody's attendance today, and would really urge folks to get involved in the conversation about westward movement, infrastructure for nat gas, and the export of this resource, because there's a real opportunity. There's no question that there is a glut at this given moment based upon other export facilities and COVID. But I think that most experts will say that there is good hope for liquefied natural gas exports into Asia based upon fuel switch, and it's the right thing for the globe with environmental fuel switch in mind. So just wanted to provide that perspective. Appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel with Dr. Fine. And Jerry, thank you very much for bringing everybody together.
My pleasure. That was an awesome presentation. I forgot to, the beginning of the conversation, forgot to put on my Aztec drilling hat, which previous life,
I appreciate it,
drilled a
Jerry.
lot of vertical wells for me, and we'll hope to have you drilling some horizontal wells here soon. But is there any comment that you have on the session coming up next, this Thursday, I guess, is the New Mexico Legislature special session? Any 1 minute overview?
You know, Jerry, I would just anticipate that legislators are going to get in and get out as quickly as possible. They're going to address budget issues, perhaps a couple of little fixes that need to be put into place as a result of COVID, maybe some racial justice issues that if they're able to get things taken care of pretty quickly. But my prediction would be 2.5, maybe 3 days max, in and out very, very quickly. And by all reports, that the legislature and the executive are very close as it relates to a budget deal. So looking to address the critical nature of where we're at, and then move on.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Any thoughts? I didn't see anything in the chat room come up, but
Go ahead.
we've got a few moments. If anyone would like to unmute themselves, and they can go ahead.
I would like to ask a question.
Okay, Dan?
All right. I would just remind Jason that I was invited by Chesapeake in 2011 to visit the Marcellus. And I asked, where are the rigs from? And they said Aztec, and I was amazed. So you had rigs in Pennsylvania then, am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We did.
Okay. Secondly, I want to ask a question following Jerry on the special session. Is there any relief discussed in it or in February for independent oil and gas producers? Any kind, not regulatory, any financial relief underway?
I know that I appreciate that question, Doctor, and I know that there is some legislation that is being promoted by an Albuquerque state representative, a woman by the name of Marion Matthews, and that legislation, I think, is seeking $500 million of a loan from the Severance Tax Permanent Fund, and then for that money to be used as low interest or no interest assistance to businesses across the state of New Mexico. I think, as anybody that's involved in New Mexico politics knows, getting legislation like that, where they're tapping the Severance Tax Permanent Fund, getting legislation like that across the finish line and through the Senate is a big conversation and difficult to do. So this is a little bit of an extraordinary circumstance in that those funds would be look to be paid back. But that's the proposal that's being pushed right now by the legislature.
Second question, Jason, I'm sorry, is this, I did not, and you followed say anything about the presidential election and its impact on New Mexico energy, oil and gas. I would just volunteer one point. If Trump is defeated and there is a Biden presidency, I would expect vast changes in geopolitical issues concerning LNG and foreign markets. Trump is an advocate now of opening up vigorously Europe for LNG. And the European Union opposes Trump. There's the Nord Stream 2 is 95% complete. And we have sanctioned a pipeline laying vessel, and Russia's going to build one anyway to complete it. Nord Stream 2 requires, and it has required, Trump, and he failed. They're going to have Gazprom Russian involved in Europe up to 40 to 70% of its gas dependency. If we don't have Trump, do we have an advocate? Is there anyone that's going to propose and go vigorously through the geopolitical side to expand American exports, both of oil and gas? That's a question of the electorate has not looked at.
Again, Dr. Fine, I very much appreciate your perspective and your knowledge. I learned in 2016 and many elections before that not to predict what's going to happen in a presidential election. But I do know that from a state of New Mexico perspective and a Rocky Mountains natural gas perspective, that we are doing everything that we can to promote the export of nat gas, and in looking at nat gas as a clean fuel alternative for energy production across the world, especially in Asia. And we would welcome partnership with any and every elected official that shares that goal, because it's critical for Rocky Mountain economies from New Mexico to Wyoming. So I guess that would be my perspective on what's going to be happening in November.
Okay, and I think I know Mr. Trump's been an ardent supporter of our business and our industry, not just in the domestic but internationally. I mean, I think, I don't know if I heard it from you, Dan, but it got us in trouble in Crimea because we tried to flex our muscles there, and it really is where we got us in this Saudi-Russian price war. So here we are.
What would you say, Jerry, to that? Do you recall in the Obama administration who reset relations with Russia? Do you remember that period?
Yes.
I will reset with Russia. That was Biden. So I would just add to this, if Biden is elected and Trump loses, we should expect a reset in that. And in terms of Crimea and others, what could be the end of sanctions against Russia and Russian oil and gas production, including changes in Iran on the treaty and letting Iran export. If Biden is elected, I'm not sure, but the reset history of Biden's initiative goes in history now. We can look at that. I appreciate Jason's concern and his devotion to New Mexico through his family, and his presentation today about New Mexico. I would only add one thing about the Rocky Mountains as well and what he's doing, which I support. And that is, we've said nothing, and Jason could follow this, about the Navajo. And I think that is a pandemic heritage that they will carry and we will carry in the San Juan Basin. Does Jason have any ideas on the Navajo integration in the San Juan Basin and in the Four Corners?
You know, at this given moment, what I would say is that my heart goes out to the Navajo Nation, and that this pandemic has impacted people of color and underserved communities in tremendous and devastating ways. And I can say that there are significant conversations that are going on about basic infrastructure on Navajo lands, all the way from clean running drinking water to broadband and beyond. And it's going to take a partnership between the nation and the state, but it's one that I feel confident that some of the greatest minds are working on right now, in working in that intergovernmental relationship. So I'm optimistic. I would further say that it's important for us to promote an attitude of positivity as it relates to the Navajo Nation and our relationship, in that, you know, that the nation has received really worldwide recognition as being a hotspot, and there's a strong potential, or a potential of the nation being stigmatized, and we can work together to prevent that, is what I would say.
Those are some very good questions that Dan, you were asking Jason, and thanks for the way this has gone. A great turnout today. I hope you found this interesting and helpful as we look at the San Juan Basin going forward. If you'd like to have a recording of this or the previous presentation we had, I will have them on Dropbox. So I put my email there on the chat. If you'd like to email me, we'll make it available on Dropbox for everybody. And then next month, July 21st, the third Tuesday, we will have a natural gas market dynamics presentation discussion on the San Juan Basin. So there are several incredibly productive Mancos horizontal wells, 2-mile laterals, which BP drilled and now is operated by ICAV. And there are some Rosa wells and some Black Hawk Energy well, which is just a 1-mile lateral. So the potential for new drilling, which I know is your sweet spot, Jason, and all of ours for that matter, to get more production coming out of the San Juan. What will that look like in the next 2 to 3 years? Will any new drilling happen? So I think that's what we're looking at as far as our next discussion. And I don't want to control this by any means, so I'm open for any suggestions that anybody has. So my email's on the chat page. Feel free to reach out, and we'll conclude the session for now. And I'll be on slowly getting off this thing if anyone would like to chat afterwards. So Dan, awesome. Thank you. Jason, incredible. Great positivity that you bring with what we need to do in the San Juan Basin. So maybe they'll start to look at the what's going on in the San Juan. What are those guys doing up there? Just like they did in the old Four Corners gas producer days in 1976, 1978. So anyways, thank you for everybody, and this concludes our presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you.